1862. The U.S. Capitol Building. A mysterious entity stalks the halls of the U.S. Capitol and White House. A reported omen of bad things coming, in the package of something that would normally be friendly. It frightens those who see it, and often leaves witnesses with more questions than answers. Possibly as to why something so cute could be so scary. Why does this legend persist for hundreds of years? And is there any way that something like this could be stalking the halls of the finest U.S. institutions? Today, on Unblurring the Unknown, we dive into the legend of the Demon Cat of Washington, D.C. Welcome back to Unblurring the Unknown. As always, I am your host, Dominic, and today we are going to go into an extremely popular legend and ghost story that comes from our nation's capital. Does the idea of a ghost cat that haunts the halls of the Capitol building have any merit behind it? Or is this just some story? Does this demon cat have some sort of bad omen attached to it that somehow predicts when bad historical events happen? Or is that merely coincidental? Now, how today's episode is going to go is that we'll run down some of the encounters people have had with the Demon Cat, some other ghost stories that exist in the DC area, and go over some possible explanations for what people think is responsible for the Demon Cat, and then at the very end, we will wrap it all up with theories. Now, what is the description of the Demon Cat? Well, the Demon Cat is described as your stereotypical short-haired domestic cat. However, witnesses have stated that the demon cat's eyes glow, and it has also been stated that the demon cat can reportedly change its size and grow exponentially larger when encountered. However, that only comes from certain encounters and not all of them. However, even when the demon cat grows in size, it doesn't morph into anything else. It just stays the same shape as your traditional house cat, it just gets exponentially bigger like I mentioned. Witnesses are split, however, on the color of the cat, as that seems to not remain consistent through reports and sightings. So please keep that in mind. Now, our story and first reported sighting of the demon cat was first told in 1898 in an article that was written in the Washington Post. In this Washington Post article, it told a story that actually took place in 1862 in the U.S. Capitol building. During this time period in American history, the basement of the U.S. Capitol building was being used as a bakery to help assist in feeding soldiers during the Civil War. In this bakery/converted basement is where the first sighting of the demon cat would take place. This first sighting would involve a guard on patrol through the bakery when he encountered the demon cat for the first time. The guard had his run-in with the cat, and it startled him, of course, because obviously he didn't think that anybody else would be down there with him, and obviously he stumbles upon what he thinks is just a regular cat. Now, obviously when the security guard saw the cat, this was nothing like a normal house cat, as it resembled more of a ghost. Now, the guard, being startled, pulled his gun and shot at the cat, and the cat would actually disappear. The gunshot had no effect on the cat, and it seemed to basically just disappear into thin air. Other accounts and legends during this time state that the cat can swell up to extremely large sizes, like I mentioned before. Now, there has been some speculation as to when this first sighting took place, and I feel important to mention this as it kind of plays into theories as well as what I think could be at play here. But the speculation as to when this first sighting took place is mostly because the Washington Post's archive database doesn't go back to 1898, and in the other articles that were written at this time actually point to the idea that the cat hasn't been seen since 1892, which is 30 years later than the Washington Post article said the demon cat was first encountered. And when other articles have mentioned that the cat was first seen in 1892 and not 1862, those articles did not mention the alleged 1862 encounter. So whether or not the cat was, up to that point, more rooted in lore and legend rather than fact kind of remains to be unknown, and that is still remains a big question mark as to the real origins of the Demon Cat and whether, something like the incident of the guard seeing the cat in the basement of the U.S. Capitol building in 1862, whether that actually happened or whether that was it was legend or lore or was talked about amongst the guards at that time of this ghost cat that's living down in the basement. However, from what I could find, the first sighting that was, I guess, pretty much confirmed was 1892, and then obviously the Washington Post article claiming to write this article in 1898. So I'm going to say that the actual origin of the Demon Cat starts within the 1890s. However, like I said, it's all rumors up to that point, and it still kind of is all rumors even now as to when the story of the Demon Cat first took shape and when it actually hit mainstream media and really all of that fun stuff. However, after this 1898 article and after 1898, the cat kept appearing and the legend kept growing. In 1935, Washington Post would write another article that says another story of a Capitol police officer who had an encounter with the Demon Cat. Now, in this article, the police officer shot, and this is going to be a quote, so I start my quote, "at a big black cat that seemed to grow as I looked at it. When I shot at the critter, it jumped right over my head." Close quote. Now, this is also the first story that gives the Demon Cat its glowing eyes, as the article described them as, and I quote, "as the eyes of this elephantized alley-troper are supposed to glow with all the hue and ferocity of the headlights of a fire engine entering one of Washington's notoriously dark alleys." Close quote. That's a very news article quote there, obviously. Now, also included in the 1935 article was a practical explanation as to what the Demon Cat was. Now, the Washington Post provided some evidence to this, and it was no secret that house cats were used extensively over the years as pest control throughout the basement of the U.S. Capitol, as they were an easy way to control the population of mice that would make their way inside to get out of the elements. Now, this story of mice in the Capitol would be backed up by former U.S. Congressman John Dingell, who said that during World War II, that there were very large mice and rats that were living in the basement, and that he actually hunted some during his tenure in the Capitol building. So, obviously, things were very different in the 1940s, because I can't imagine a congressman in today's day and age would hunt giant rats in the basement of the Capitol building, but to each their own. Now, using cats to control the mice population would obviously make sense. However, we'll save theories as to that this is a pest control animal or something like that till the very end. But the Washington Post article said that was what they thought. They thought that this was just a pest control cat that was either made up as a fun ghost story or so on and so forth, or something even in between. They provided very rational explanations to it rather than saying that this was a ghost or a spirit of some sort. Now, another first-hand sighting of the Demon Cat comes from the website esoterics.com, which shares a couple different stories that are also associated with the Demon Cat. One of which includes the cat growing larger, like I previously mentioned, and another one including that it actually pounces towards people, and another one which included an elderly security guard who died of a heart attack after having his encounter with the Demon Cat. Again, I don't know the claim of these stories. I don't know the validity of these stories. However, in this website, it also included a document from the U.S. Congress in 1981 that states the following about the Demon Cat. And I quote, "This was a particular problem late at night, after the building had closed and the members and visitors had departed. Perhaps this situation accounts for a variety of ghost stories that have been told down through the years. One of the oldest stories is recounted by newsman John Alexander in his book of Washington Ghost Tales. It concerns the infamous denizen of the Capitol's lower reaches, Demon Cat. As the story goes, Demon Cat always waits until its victim is alone. The animal's prey are generally members of the Capitol Police Force. One victim told of encountering the infamous cat on a winter's eve. As it walked towards a policeman, the cat began to swell. The guard felt paralyzed as he stared into the glowing, piercing eyes that came closer and closer and grew larger and larger. The animal swelled to the size of a giant tiger, yet never lost its unmistakable cat-like form. Its purring changed to a ferocious snarl. There was a deafening roar as the monstrous animal leaped with claws extended towards its victim. The guard couldn't move. His feet seemed nailed to the floor. He covered his face with his arms as the giant animal seemed just inches away from landing on him. He screamed. Nothing happened. The demon cat vanished into thin air as the man screamed. The trembling guard stood alone, the corridor deserted, the silence pierced only by his breathing. His limp body was covered in a cold, clammy sweat. He felt drained. The narrow marble hallway now reminded him of a tomb. The guard shuddered, tried to pull himself together, and headed back to his desk. For some reason, he just didn't feel like finishing his rounds. This grisly feline was blamed for an elderly guard's fatal heart attack, and the cat is reputed to appear only on the eve of a national tragedy or upon the changing of presidential administrations. And I close the quote there. Obviously, like I said, this was mentioned in a U.S. Congress document in 1981, so obviously the legend of the Demon Cat was widely spread amongst, obviously, members of the U.S. Congress at that point, and obviously, if they wrote this document, they were acknowledging the Demon Cat's existence to some regard, whether it is factual or whether it is lore-based. They're at least acknowledging its existence, which I think adds a little bit of credibility to this whole entire thing. Now, I feel like this statement and paragraph of information is important. Like I just mentioned previously about the report of the elderly security guard having a heart attack and dying from fright, is kind of seemingly confirmed in this kind of document/statement from the U.S. Congress. Now, in addition to this, it lays out another startling trend that we hadn't gone into yet, and that is being that the Demon Cat seemingly has this omen of negativity attached to it, in which the cat appears during major negative events in U.S. history. Now, this rumor goes that when the cat seemingly migrates from the basement of the Capitol building to the main floor of the White House, it foreshadows a negative event to follow. Now, in 1929, a White House guard reportedly saw the cat on the main floor of the White House, and what followed was the stock market crash, of 1929. Witnesses also saw the cat in the White House just before President Abe Lincoln was assassinated, and also in 1963, on the night before JFK was assassinated. However, could this merely be coincidental? Now, the cat was not reportedly sighted before the attacks on Pearl Harbor, or even 9/11, which cast doubt into this theory that the Demon Cat is an omen. Now, the U.S. Congress article that I previously mentioned said that the cat also appears on the changing of presidential administrations. However, I couldn't find any article or resource that said or provided sightings that the Demon Cat appeared on the eves of presidential changes or anything within those regards. So that kind of casts doubt into the idea that it's kind of like an omen. However, at this point, you could merely theorize that it is coincidental and that the cat is migrating from place to place, because if it is real and if it is a ghost or a spirit of some sort, it has a spiritual attachment of some sort to either the U.S. Capitol building in the basement and to the White House for that matter. However, that's merely speculation. However, it is also important to note that the Demon Cat is not the only ghost to haunt the grounds of the Capitol building, or even the White House, for that matter. And it's important to note that the White House is really a haven for the paranormal, and obviously, you could kind of make a guess about that. The White House has seen so much changes, a lot of death, even war. I mean, even the White House was burned down at one point. So it's no shocker that the White House would be this haven for the paranormal and the spiritual and everything in between there. Now, it's also no secret that numerous presidents who have passed through the White House have now been rumored to have been sighted at the White House as ghosts. Now, the history of paranormal activity in the White House can be traced back to, shockingly enough, 1862. Now, is there any correlation between the paranormal activity that starts in 1862 in the White House and the first alleged demon cat sighting in 1862? Could that be coincidence? Could that be related? That remains to be unknown. In 1862, as we're tracing the paranormal activity back, this is when Mary Lincoln, First Lady of President Abraham Lincoln, would conduct seances in the Red Room of the White House. And if you don't know what a seance is pretty much like they set up some sort of gathering, some sort of congregation of people, and it is a way that spiritualists try and contact the dead. Now, why Mary Lincoln did this is that she was trying to do this to help cope with the death of her son Willie's death in February of 1862. Spiritualism was big during this time period, and during the Civil War, it was offered as some type of reassurance to grieving families who took it upon themselves to try and contact their departed loved ones who passed away during the war. Now, it is unclear whether or not Mary Lincoln had any luck in getting in touch with Willie, but the ghost of Willie Lincoln was reportedly seen by members of the Grant administration during the 1870s. In addition to trying to contact her son, during this time period, it was widely regarded that the ghost of former President Andrew Jackson stalked the halls of the building. Now, he was usually seen laying in his former bed in the Rose Room of the White House, and Mary Lincoln even stated that she heard the ghost of Jackson stomping and yelling throughout the halls. And then you can fast forward to 1904, Jerry Smith, who worked in the White House through numerous administrations since the 1860s, and held numerous positions in the White House during his tenure there. Now, over Jerry Smith's 35 years of working in the White House, Jerry claimed to see numerous ghosts and spirits, so of which he claimed were the ghosts of Abraham Lincoln, Ulysses S. Grant, William McKinley, and several ghosts of former First Ladies as well. Lastly, an unidentified ghost of a young boy known as the Thing would frighten members of the Taft administration in 1911. Now, the Thing would often lean over people's shoulders, or people would get the feeling of not being alone and that they were being watched, and obviously when they looked around them, they couldn't find anything around them, and there was seemingly no explanation for that feeling. Now, President Taft did not like the employees and staffers talking about the Thing, and if he caught them talking about the Thing, they would be fired. Now, President Taft did not like the spreading of stories about the ghost, and that reason kind of seems to be unknown, but I have to imagine that his reasoning for that is that he must have been some sort of a skeptic or did not believe in the paranormal whatsoever, and that he did not want a quote-unquote ghost to distract those from doing their jobs within the nation's capital, which would make sense. However, like I mentioned, the only reason he probably felt this way was because he was a skeptic and he didn't fully believe in basically the stories people were spreading about this ghost of a 15-year-old boy who would kind of walk the halls of the White House. Now, in addition to these stories I just shared, there are other instances of people who have lived at the White House over the period of the building's history, and even outside of it, all over D.C., such as sightings in the garden of the White House of an unnamed British soldier who died in the War of 1812, who can sometimes be seen wandering the garden with a torch in his hand. Now that I went down that little rundown of ghosts in the White House, and the reason I did this is because I wanted to provide you with more information about the history of the paranormal in the White House, because I think this plays a factor into the whole believability of the Demon Cat in general. Now, if the White House has this history of the paranormal, starting perhaps before or during the same time of when the Demon Cat was first started, it would stand to be reasonable that the Demon Cat can be a real entity, and that it has been spread around through the years because of the paranormal activity that was going on. Now, before we do get into theories, I want to go over a possible instance that could have influenced the story of the Demon Cat, and that is the story of President Calvin Coolidge's cat, and I believe I'm going to pronounce this right, but if I pronounce it wrong, obviously I do apologize, and it's Teague, which is Teague? I'm going to say Teague, and it's short for Tiger. He named his cat Tiger, and they called him Teague. I'm going to call him Teague for this story. And if I am pronouncing that wrong, I do apologize. But like I said, I am going to call him Teague for this little story. Now, Calvin Coolidge's presidency lasted from 1923 to 1929, and Teague, the president, and the First Lady's cat. Now, Teague would often go out and explore D.C., and it wasn't uncommon for him to leave for multiple days at a time and be seen lurking through other federal buildings. Obviously, they were very relaxed in their approach to Teague's freedom, and people and researchers and everybody in between kind of speculate that Teague could be an explanation for the source of the stories of the Demon Cat seemingly appearing in multiple buildings throughout DC. Now, why you would think, and you might be asking yourself, okay, if Calvin Coolidge's presidency was between 1923 and 1929, and Teague was kind of going in between the buildings, that timeline doesn't really match up with the 1860s or 1890s. How could that be responsible for the Demon Cat? Well, that would thoroughly depend on the idea that you believe that the Demon Cat is some sort of fictitious entity, and that the story pretty much evolved over time, and evolved with the idea that the Demon Cat seemingly just shows up everywhere, when in reality, the cat that was showing up everywhere was Teague, and kind of the story got twisted and turned around, and maybe there was an elaborate game of telephone going on where the story just gradually changed over the years and was greatly exaggerated. But that is if you believe that theory, of course. Now, Teague did go missing while at his time in the White House, and he was eventually found and returned to President Coolidge. But his vanishing acts would be widely talked about, and Teague's ability to almost disappear and then show back up at random, like I mentioned, could have contributed to the stories of the Demon Cat, and the idea that a cat ghost could be roaming the halls of the Capitol building, and at times, the White House. Now, like I mentioned, this idea that Teague kind of inspiring and pushing on the Demon Cat story is thoroughly dependent on the idea that you think that the Demon Cat is a fictitious entity and is not real and was made up for a variety of reasons. However, it is interesting to think about with Teague kind of having this ability to kind of just go missing for a couple days at a time and then just magically reappear. However, I think that was important to mention, and I felt like it was important to mention, so that's why I kind of put it right there at the end. But with that being said, let's kind of go into theories about kind of what could be responsible for the Demon Cat. Obviously, there's a lot of lore and there's a lot of legend tied to this, and that's actually going to be our first theory. Now, our first theory is called folklore legend. Now, our first theory, like I mentioned, is that this is a legend. Now, cats are, no secret, often attributed to a spiritual standpoint and carry significance from that. It is possible with the paranormal activity that was taking place in the DC area that the Demon Cat could have just been a tale that was created and that was shared amongst night security guards who would swap tales of the paranormal. And now that is not a very far-fetched theory by any means. Now, our second theory is called fake/hoax. Now, it is also no secret that maybe Capitol security guards saw something and stretched the truth. Like I mentioned, they sitting around at the middle of the night and they decided to swap tales, and now over the course of that, maybe somebody said, oh, I saw a ghost cat, and they stretched the truth a little bit, and that's how the story was made. Now, like I said, could they have actually seen something that was genuine and then basically just fibbed and lied? That is also very possible. Now, could they have attributed it to something that just wasn't real, or associated a sighting of the Demon Cat with just a actual cat that was merely lurking in the basement trying to hunt down some rats and mice for an evening meal? That is very possible as well. It's also no secret that maybe you lie, to try and get some time off of work after encountering the cat that you say grew exponentially in size, but that could also be attributed to the idea that the security guards during this time period often drank on the job, and in their inebriated state could confuse a common pest control cat with a spectral or spiritual entity in some way, shape, or form. Now, our last theory is that the Demon Cat is real, and due to DC's history and paranormal past, it would be realistically it's just realistic to assume that having a ghost in the form of a cat wouldn't be outlandish. And you can even look at the example of the Yule cat in Iceland as another rumored ghost feline with some actual credibility behind it as well. And there are more examples of these types of paranormal entities throughout history, and especially of ghosts in the shape of animals. Now, this wouldn't make this an isolated incident or case, and people who believe in the demon cat's existence kind of thoroughly stand by it. But regardless of that, this is one of the most popular ghost stories in DC, and like I mentioned, a lot of people stand by it, even though it seems to me that there's kind of a little bit of lack of evidence in some instances and cases. However, people who stand by the idea that the demon cat's existence is real, they point to an example in 1898, when a piece of the Capitol building was being repaired. A set of small paw prints can be found in that concrete. However, that could seriously have just been a pest control cat or house cat that seemingly meandered its way through the wet concrete and left the paw marks in the concrete. Then that was back in 1898. Now, with that being said, what's my theory on all of this? I personally think that this is a hoax. And I know that's not the fun explanation, or that's the fun reasoning behind all of this. But I think that this was a story that kind of stretched the limits on how far the truth could go. I think a combo of the true paranormal accounts that were coming out of DC and the White House area fed the idea of a ghost cat that stalked the basement of the Capitol building. Drunk security guards further added fuel to the fire, and the idea of a security guard having a heart attack after witnessing the demon cat could be just contributed to a normal science explanation rather than a security guard passing away due to fright. That just, unfortunately, doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I could be wrong, but that is what it seems like to me. I think there are a couple loopholes in the whole story altogether, and I think there's a little shred of truth in some of these accounts, but for the most part, I think it was greatly exaggerated. Like I said, I know that's not the fun explanation for all this, because I did really want to believe the idea that there was a ghost cat that was kind of stalking around, because it's like, who doesn't like cats, right? So the idea of there being a ghost cat, that it's in the Capitol building is cool and interesting. However, the more I researched this and the more articles I read, it just seemed very kind of urban legend folklore, and that's kind of really all it was. Again, like I mentioned, I know that's not the fun explanation for all of this, but if you have some more evidence to provide, or if you've looked into the demon cat previously and you think that the demon cat is real, please let me know. Feel free to share your opinion in the comments or contact me directly. You can do that on my email, unblurringtheunknown@gmail.com. And while you're there sending me your opinion in my email, you can also send me topic suggestions. You can send me over a topic suggestion. I'll do some light reading, research into it, and maybe if I like it enough, I'll throw it into the queue. And I have a pretty large queue going for episodes and topics and everything like that, and it seems to just grow and grow every week as I do research into these and I find something else that I'm like, ooh, that sounds interesting, and I add it onto the queue. But with that being said, feel free to do that if you want to. In addition to that, if you are listening to this on Spotify, please turn on notifications so you get notified every time I post a new episode. And if you're listening to this on YouTube, please like, follow, subscribe. And you will also be notified every time I post a new episode when you click that subscribe button. But with that being said, that is going to conclude today's episode on the Demon Cat of D.C. If you enjoyed it, obviously, feel free to leave a comment, so on and so forth, like, subscribe, all that fun stuff. And in addition to that, if you are not aware, I have new cover art. That cover art will be featured on my Instagram. That is Unblurring the Unknown on Instagram. That new cover art will be on there, as well as any photos I found relevant to this week's episode. However, with that being said, I want to conclude today's episode, and I want to kind of transition into an announcement for the following week. Now, obviously, my life has been a little bit crazy with my day job and everything like that over the period of the last week and a half or so. So, obviously, I threw together this episode on the Demon Cat. Obviously, this one might end up being a few minutes shorter than maybe I previously wanted to, but obviously that is because of my schedule being so wild and crazy. But I wanted to share basically a little factoid about next week's episode. Next week's episode is going to be a true crime episode. I'm not going to give it away, as that would obviously, I don't want anybody to go forward and do all research and spoil the whole story of everything. But it is very interesting, and I'm getting very consumed by it, very engrossed by it, as I'm trying to leave absolutely no stone unturned when it comes to giving you absolutely all the facts in this story, all of the information that's out there, and because there's a lot of information out there on this. And I know this is kind of like a tease for next week. But yeah, I'm really engrossed by it. I'm really consumed by it, and it's going to be a big undertaking for me, and it's going to be probably a considerably long episode than what you might all be used to from me. But I wanted to leave that little tease for you guys, or whatever you want to call it, at the end of this episode, as an explanation as to why maybe this episode's a little bit shorter and why I didn't put out an episode last week. So I do want to apologize about that. But with that being said, that is going to conclude this week's episode. Please let me know what you thought about it. Please let me know your opinions on the Demon Cat and how you feel. But like I said, that is going to be the end of this week's episode. I look forward to next week. I am still doing research on it. I was doing research before I recorded today. So I am kind of doing research a whole bunch over this, and it's taking up a lot of my time. So I hope to put together a really, really good, polished, and perfect product for you guys next week. But with that being said, that is going to end today's episode. And with that being said, thank you for supporting me. It means the world. And with that being said, I will see you all next week for something I'm very excited for. So, with that being said, I will see you on the next one.